I'm Beau Johnson. It's December 30th, 2025. Welcome to YesToHellWith.com. Today is your final opportunity to get the $1 report detailing ChatGPT's admission that the federal government operates the income tax system through fraudulent presumption. Visit jamesbowersjohnson.com to get your copy. We've spent the last week discussing the four corners of justice diagram and the people who suffered under the force of unrelenting and unjust systems. Tomorrow, I will be offering a rebuke against the entire judicial apparatus by focusing on the main actors involved, namely judges and lawyers. Today, the case of Tony Figueroa. Tony Figueroa was not a corrupt executive. He was not a decision maker. He was not a man in control of money. Tony was a mechanical engineer at a private New York hospital. He started at the bottom and worked his way up. He was promoted based upon merit. Hospital leadership testified under oath that Tony's advancement had nothing to do with bribery, favoritism, or influence. In fact, the hospital president once stated that Tony would become the first vice president without a college degree, and that the hospital intended to pay his tuition to Cornell University. That is the man the federal government chose to prosecute. Here is what Tony Figueroa actually did. Tony had limited administrative authority. He could approve requisitions under $50,000 and forward them upward to his boss. He had no authority to approve contracts, no authority to select vendors, no authority to issue payments, no access to bank accounts. Tony had no control over bids, no control over money. All of this is not disputed. This is sworn testimony. In 2006, federal investigators began probing allegations of bid rigging at the hospital. The government later claimed as much as $300 million in contracts were involved. But here is the first critical fact to consider. The government never proved bid rigging, not once, not against anyone. The original charge failed, so the government pivoted. Instead of prosecuting the hospital itself, instead of prosecuting executives with actual authority, instead of referring the matter to the New York State authorities, the federal government claimed jurisdiction because money moved through banks and payments crossed state lines, interstate commerce. This was the hook. Tony became useful to the government, not because he committed a crime, but because his boss was under investigation. The government needed leverage. They needed cooperation. They needed testimony. They needed Tony. But Tony had nothing to give. He did not know of a bid rigging scheme. He had no firsthand knowledge of corruption. He had never approved payments. He had never steered contracts one way or the other. So he refused to cooperate. That is the man that is Tony Figueroa. He refused to lie. He refused to roll. He refused to become a witness to a crime he never committed nor observed. That refusal changed everything. After 6 years of investigation with no evidence tying Tony to bid rigging, the government charged him anyway, just before the statute of limitations expired. Not with bid rigging, but with wire fraud, mail fraud, with conspiracy. Conspiracy, the charge that requires the least proof and offers the greatest flexibility. The government's theory was not that Tony stole money, not that the hospital lost money, not that patients were harmed, not that contracts were inflated. There was no loss. The hospital paid fair market prices for all of its projects. The work was completed. The work met code requirements. Hospital officials testified to all of that. Instead, the government alleged that Tony received gifts, tickets, gift cards, cash bonuses at Christmas, wedding gifts, social events. All of it was commonplace, open, culturally accepted within the hospital. It wasn't secret. It wasn't hidden. It wasn't unique to Tony. Tony received no gifts by mail. He received no gifts tied to contract approvals. Tony received no gain from any alleged scheme. Yet still the government pressed forward. To build its case, the prosecutors relied heavily upon one cooperating witness, a contractor named Porath. Porath wore a wire. Porath recorded conversations. Then Porath fled the country. By the time of the trial, Porath was a fugitive. Tony's defense moved to exclude the tapes. The Sixth Amendment guarantees the right to confront witnesses. Porath could not be cross-examined. The judge allowed the tapes anyway. 5 minutes of audio taken from 5 hours of recordings became the centerpiece of the trial. From those 5 minutes, prosecutors extracted 7 words, quote, "writing recs so they can issue checks," end quote. Nice little jingo for those prosecutors to repeat. Those 7 words were repeated again and again and again, a refrain, a slogan, a narrative device. Context was stripped away. Meaning was supplied by the government alone. The jury never heard the full recordings. They were denied access during deliberations. Tony was convicted, not because evidence proved guilt, but because procedure permitted conviction. At sentencing, the injustice deepened. There was no victim, there was no loss, there was no gain. So the court substituted someone else's gain, money transferred to Tony's boss, and applied it to Tony. Under the federal guidelines, Tony received the same sentencing points as those who actually profited. 3 years in federal prison. I met Tony Figueroa in a place most Americans never see. I met him while I was housed in isolation inside a maximum security federal penitentiary in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania. One day, without warning, Tony was abruptly placed into my cell. No explanation, no transition. Just 2 men confined, stripped of context, stripped of dignity, left only with truth. And I came to know Tony very, very well. Tony is not a theory. He is not a case study. He is not a statistic. He is a good, solid man. He is one of the first men I ever encountered in prison who wept openly, not for himself, but for what had been done to his wife and his children, his family. The pain was unmistakable. The sorrow was profound, and his belief in his innocence was unshakable. Not defiant, not arrogant, unshakable. Tony is the kind of man people once called the salt of the earth, because there is no other phrase that fits. Giving, honest, loving, patient, kind, thoughtful. He never sought power. He never sought advantage. He never sought to manipulate a system. And that was his mistake, because far too many Americans do not understand how the system actually works. They do not understand who they are within it. They do not understand how authority is presumed against them. They do not understand how silence becomes consent, or how refusal to cooperate is treated as guilt. Tony did not lack character. He lacked systemic fluency and knowledge, and the system does not forgive that. So let's look at the 4 corners of justice diagram. Place Tony inside the diagram. Crime? None. Malicious intent? None. Victim? None. Loss? The same. None. Those 4 corners collapse immediately. So the system renders a different verdict. The judicial system is guilty. Guilty of institutional arrogance, guilty of presumed guilt, guilty of valuing conviction over conscience, guilty of substituting procedure for truth. And then there is a final corner, one that belongs to us, the American people. Guilty, not of malice, but of ignorance, apathy, and fear. Tony Figueroa was not destroyed because he was guilty. He was destroyed because the system was never challenged. And unless Americans learn how authority is asserted, how presumptions are created, and how justice must be actively defended, Tony will not be the last good man to weep in a prison cell for a crime that never existed. Think about that. And as always, May truth reign supreme.